Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our webinar event brought to you by the George Washington University's Graduate School of Political Management in Washington, D.C. Our special guest lecturer today is Professor Nancy Bocskor to deliver on the topic, Go Fish, How to Catch and Keep Contributors Using Storytelling for Success. So before we meet our presenter, let's go over some housekeeping items. Our event is currently in listen-only mode, so questions or comments can be sent to me via the Q&A window. It's the purple icon on your menu, and other functions available to you are the technical FAQs, slides and media player, booking an appointment, and speaker bio if you'd like to read up on our presenter's full bio. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Professor Nancy Bocskor is the author of Go Fish, How to Catch and Keep Contributors, a practical guide to fundraising, and is an adjunct professor at George Washington University's Graduate School of Political Management, where she teaches both online and classroom fundraising courses. She also taught a class on women, democracy, and global politics. Tag as a democracy coach, Professor Bocskor teaches citizens in the United States and internationally how to communicate with passion to affect change in their communities. Welcome, Professor Bocskor, and to our attendees.
Well, good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us today for this 1 hour, as I call this, sampling of my fundraising class at GW, where I've taught since 2006, 2007, and it's been so much fun because of the magic of Facebook to see my students progress in their careers. And I always receive nice notes that they really were able to launch that path from what I taught in this beginning fundraising class for them. So today we are going to do speed fundraising. I'm going to cover some fundamentals, which are part of my first week's lecture at GSPM. So my presentation is called Storytelling, Tell Me a Story, and how you can use storytelling to raise more money, get more volunteers, get more votes, and really push for your issues in the community. And I think that's so important because the story is what pulls everything together and provides a foundation. So just remember, there are two things that are important in politics. This first is money, and I just can't remember what the second one is. This saying did not come about after Citizens United, nowhere even in this century. No, it was quipped by Senator Mark Hanna from Ohio, I like to point out, since I am sitting in my living room in Dayton, Ohio. But Mark Hanna was William McKinley's campaign strategist and the U.S. Senator from my state. Now, this has always been true, and in my class, my students actually read The History of Campaign Finance by Dr. Tony Corrado from Colby College. And it is a fascinating look at how we got to where we are today in American politics and using fundraising, where you can see how Andrew Jackson raised money. And let's just say alcohol was involved. But I really think people need to have the historical aspect as they are learning how to raise money so they know why we have the rules and regulations that we do now. You can't save the world if you can't pay the rent. Morton Blackwell, the founder of the Leadership Institute in Arlington, this is one of his favorite sayings. You know, we all have lofty plans and goals. We may want to run for office. We want to help people who are running for office. We may want to start a nonprofit or be involved in civic activities, but we can't do that if you can't learn how to raise money. And the good news is we'll go through this, Americans are really born fundraisers. I say it's in our DNA, and we have it as we come out of the womb. But it is a skill that isn't always there around the world. So let me tell you a little bit about this photo. A lot of what I'm going to talk about this morning I developed when I first went to Moldova in 2014, where I was asked to train Ukrainian diaspora living in Moldova. It's a country. It's between Ukraine, Romania, and Russia, where they did not have a fundraising culture. And so I spent 3 days with these activists training them how to ask for money, even if you hate to, and putting a foundation together so they could actually raise money in what is the poorest and most corrupt of the countries in Europe. $1 billion is missing from their treasury. They still haven't recovered it all. So I was so pleased after I had them build message houses and practice that I was sent this photo a few months ago, or a few months later after I taught. And there is Father Christmas. My friend Dimitri is the one in the black turtleneck and the floating head, as I like to say. And he said, Nancy, I'm so excited. Their goal was to raise money to buy new sporting equipment just for one impoverished school on the Ukrainian border. I mean, these are schools that don't have textbooks. There's no heat. It's a tough place. But he was so excited that using the techniques that he learned, that they raised enough money to buy sporting equipment for 2 schools and also 2 kindergartens. And since that time, he's continued to use the skills and techniques that from those sessions. And so I have seen him in Moldova 2 other times. I've gone back, and they are continuing to have success in a country, again, where there was no fundraising culture. So you can save the world if you can raise the money. Now, I hate to tell you, there is not a money tree. If I could count the number of people who have called me in October of the election year saying, Nancy, I can't raise any money in the district. Can I pay you 10% of nothing to raise money for me in D.C.? Good fundraising has to start at home if you're a candidate. It's an investment. And so when I talk to these people, what do you do? Well, I still live in my parents' basement and I read a lot. I'm really smart. And I go, okay, well, are you a veteran? Nope, not a veteran. Did you go to college? No, I don't have that network. Do you volunteer in the community? Are you in the JCs or the Lions? Nope, I don't really like people. Okay, how about charitable? Do you do anything to help with breast cancer prevention? Nope, nope, nope. As we go through all of this, this is somebody who has done nothing. There is not a money tree. You have to plant the seeds yourself. In fact, when I work with candidates, I go in and I do a day or a day and a half of a term that someday I will learn to say in French that we call the data dump. I want to pull out from you every person that you have a connection with. I want to build your sphere of influence. So I ask a lot of questions. What organizations are you involved in? Are you in a fraternal organization? Are you a member of the chamber? Are you in a labor union? Tell me, what do you do for a living? Because I want to reach out to different occupations. But we sit down and you document all of this. We write it down. I have people bring their Rolodexes. People still have those. Their holiday card list. We look at LinkedIn. I look at Facebook. I use Facebook as my prime networker because I want to see if I have somebody who's a stranger. We may have some mutual friends, but we have to start planting the seeds. And so that data dump where I extract information where we have at least 100 people that you can ask for money is a critical component of putting together your fundraising team. Now, I do want to point out this money tree is a quick check cashing place outside of Reno, Nevada that I took a photo of years ago. And so I always want to advise people, do not fund your campaign with a car title loan, right? Not a good way. These are always found outside of casinos. So planting that seeds, you need to learn how to persuade people. Making connections. In my world, it's not 6 degrees of separation. It's 1 degree of separation because everybody knows somebody. You need to have a written case of support. You have to tell people how they will help others, but how they will feel if they donate. You have to have a plan of action. You oftentimes, you have to learn how to have a good debate. There may be some arguments. But at the end of the day, a lot of what we do in fundraising is sales 101, is developing the message to persuade people to buy the product. And that can be the candidate, it can be for your organization, but you have to figure out what is it that you are doing that people need to invest in. Persistence is the answer, and a sense of humor helps. I stumbled into fundraising many decades ago because my old boss, some guy named Newt Gingrich, called me one day and said, Nancy, you'll ask anybody anything. You're incredibly cheerfully persistent, and I threw great parties. But I will tell you, I take my work very seriously, but I don't take myself seriously. You have to have that sense of humor because people are going to tell you no a lot. You're going to have a lot more no's than you're ever going to have yeses. But you're not going to permanently close the door. Just because somebody tells me no today doesn't mean it means no tomorrow. It can be there's a scandal. As we always like to laugh, there's always the Anthony Weiner scandal, right? You can pick which one that was. But, when he was running for Congress, his Republican opponent, didn't have a chance. Well, all of a sudden, everything changed because of the scandal. It may be the wrong person has asked somebody for money. I leverage these relationships. It's a lot more effective to have a car dealer ask another car dealer to give money. What is that relationship? But just remember, just because, unless somebody tells you, I hate Democrats or I hate Republicans, keep that door open. Keep in mind, as we look at potential donors, most of them are our friends, neighbors, and colleagues when we're starting this out. And there's always going to be 20% that are watching Fox and Newsmax and all of these conservative shows. You're going to have 20% that are watching Rachel Maddow and CNN and MSNBC and having more liberal sources. But that leaves you a big bulk in the middle, 60% or more that are going to support you, not necessarily because they agree with you on the issues or your party, but they're going to support you because what you have achieved in the community to help others. The good news, as I like to point out, you and your volunteers are already fundraisers. You just forgot. Remember when I said we come out of the womb as fundraisers, particularly in the U.S., right? Most people, half of Americans still go to church. When I was a kid, I'm 3 years old and I'm putting a dime in the collection rate or in the collection plate. And I always laugh because I was from a family that was pretty competitive. So if somebody put in a quarter, I was going to put in 50 cents as a kid. But we get used to giving back. The Girl Scouts. Girls are learning how to sell cookies. Sally Foster wrapping paper. Oh my gosh, when I moved to Texas a little bit more than 2 years ago, I must have had 100 rolls of Sally Foster wrapping paper because every one of my friends' kids sold me wrapping paper. I had never used it. Heck, these days you're lucky if you get a gift in a Walgreens plastic bag. So I ended up donating all of that wrapping paper to a nonprofit in Virginia that raised money to help others by wrapping Christmas presents. So the good news, we're already a fundraiser. We just have to pivot it to help ourselves. So what does a fundraising foundation look like? And until recently, until January 6th, I really used to talk about the 3 T's, but I've had to increase this to the 4 T's. What is it that you need to build a solid fundraising foundation? And I developed this for use when I first went to Moldova. I had no inkling that I would now have to teach it and remind people in America that these are the things we need to consider. And the first is your personal trust asset is your most valuable commodity. As this, trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair. You have to be a person of your word. When I work with women in particular who are very reluctant to ask for money for their own campaigns, I have to, ask them, They're the women that are out there when you ask them to, can you bake 3 dozen cookies for the next bake sale? They step up, right? These are people in your community you trust because they get things done. So again, pivoting to it's okay to ask for yourself because people trust you. I work in a lot of countries where there's no trust asset. Whether it's a country where you don't trust your neighbors because the neighbor might turn you in to the secret police so they can have heat in the winter or a better job or a better house. Do not let this destroy America. We still need to have that trust asset, and you need to build it every day. You need to be trusted with the money you are given. Be a good steward, which leads us to be transparent. Learn to love a spreadsheet. My gosh, people are giving you money. And in the United States, there's no tax deduction for political donations at the federal level. People in other countries are just amazed that people give money to political campaigns. So be transparent, be a good steward. We have campaign finance laws for a reason. And despite what you often read, we have strict campaign finance laws. I tell people I never want to go to jail over a campaign finance violation, right? I don't like orange. I don't want to wear a jumpsuit. And really, I do not like structured environments. So I tell people, here's how we're going to use your money. When I ask people for money, I need $1,000 today so I can buy 5 radio spots, right? Monetize everything. You don't have to give away the entire budget for a campaign or for a nonprofit, but you need to be transparent. And do remember, people go to jail when they are lying and cheating with fundraising. So there's a reason we have laws. Be transparent. The third T is tithing, giving and tithing. Tithing is an old biblical term where people would give 10% of their income to the church. But I really see this as the golden rule. Again, coming back to, it is in our DNA in America if there is an earthquake in Haiti, a disaster anywhere in the world, people step up to help. I mean, look how much money AOC has raised for Texas. It's more than $5 million to help people in need. We are a nation that gives back. Now we just have to, we're used to raising it for others, pivot to raise it for your own campaign. In England, in Great Britain, only 6% of Brits actually go to church on a regular basis anymore, and nonprofit fundraising has plummeted. So remember, we are in a culture that likes to give. You just have to build that case of support. Now, after January 6th, which I worked in and out of that U.S. Capitol for 39 years of my life, I've had to add the fourth, and that is the truth. Everyone has their own version of the truth. We all thought the internet was going to make us smarter. Instead, I think it's had the opposite effect. It means that people believe wild rumors and the conspiracy theory. How are you going to be somebody who's a conveyor of truth, making sure you have the right information to share? A lot of this goes back to, we need civics back in our schools. But we need to now consider what is the truth, because if you don't have the truth, you have nothing. So think about this and what you bring to the table and how you portray yourself as a candidate or as you make a determination of who you work for. So fundraising success is all about relationships. Again, it's 1 degree of separation, not 6. Everyone knows someone else. As we sit here, and I never reach out to somebody. I've replaced, as I like to say, I've replaced cold calls with warm communication. Ask people for introductions. Look at LinkedIn. Take a look at who mutual friends may be. And again, I find Facebook, because it's more personal, to even be a better source for me to make introductions. It happens all the time. So build those relationships in your community. Think long-term, not a one-off. This is eHarmony, not Tinder, right? Just because you've asked somebody for money and they've said no doesn't mean to cut off all communications. It's not a one-night stand. And once somebody gives you money, be grateful. Don't always ask for money. Send them, you need to send them handwritten thank you notes, put them in a newsletter, but don't take your donors for granted. It's the number one reason people quit giving is that they were not thanked in a meaningful way. So this is a long-term relationship you're building. In many fundraising operations, people start out maybe as a $50 or $100 donor, but you're upgrading them. You're getting them to give $250, $1,000. In colleges, they want to ultimately have people give major amounts of money. But you have to start off thinking this is a long-term relationship. It is not someone just giving you money one time. First step, collect the list, right? I've never met a list in my life that didn't bring me one or more of three things: a vote, a volunteer, or a donation. When we sit down, and I actually do fill out a form on who do you know. Get your church membership list. We talked about civic organizations, fraternal organizations, membership groups, sororities, fraternities, college alums, high schools. I had a friend that I went to high school with in Ohio that ran for state senator out in Nebraska, and we actually reached out to people in our graduating class who gave her money, who may not have seen her in almost 40 years. But you need to see, everybody knows somebody and has a connection. And beyond those personal connections, I start and I have a list of what companies are in your community. I would not do a race in Omaha, Nebraska without having a connection to somebody at Union Pacific or Mutual of Omaha, for instance, right? Because if we're going to raise some PAC money and get more support, I need to have somebody at that corporate level. The same way on your driving around, what's in your district? I was once out in western Nebraska when I saw the world's largest Walmart. And it was a distribution facility. And I knew I made sure our candidate went and met with the manager. We ended up being able to get a PAC check from Walmart because of that connection. The number one political action committee in America, the most political organization, is National Association of Realtors. There's a realtor in every square inch of America. We have several GSPM alums over at the realtors. But you need to figure out who's my realtor, who's my car dealer, who's my doctor. As we are putting those pieces of the puzzle together, there are nearly 6,000 political action committees. And so we're trying to figure out, a lot of political action committees determine who they will support based on a member back in the community. So everything has to start at home. So collect list, put this puzzle together of your list of contacts. People are twice as likely to do something if they're asked by a friend. An old colleague of mine, since I have known since 1980, many years ago, joined the board of an organization called Youth for Tomorrow. I didn't have a clue what Youth for Tomorrow is, right? It has the word youth in it. Great. I love youth organizations. Tomorrow, it means there must be a vision. Good thing. And it was founded by former Washington Redskins coach Joe Gibbs. So if you lived in D.C., you love Joe Gibbs. But every year I would receive an email from this organization. I'd delete it or ignore it. I would receive the expensive 4-piece wedding style invitation, would throw it away. But every year my friend would get on the phone and go, Nancy, it's Youth for Tomorrow ball time. Can I put you down for a $200 ticket for the raffle? And every year I would give $200 to an organization. I don't have a frickin' clue what it did. And I was on a panel with another fundraiser who said, I give him money every year too. And I don't even know what the group does. Remember, it's that trust asset. So if people are twice as likely to do something if they're asked by a friend. So build those networks. The first year my friend was on the board, he said he raised about $5,000. The last year he was on the board, he raised more than $60,000. But it meant one of the busiest and most successful guys that I know got on the telephone and called people. It's a lot harder to turn somebody down on the phone than it is to delete an email. Pop quiz. Hyatt Regency heiress Penny Pritzker served as Barack Obama's national finance chair back in 2008. Why did she agree to take on this role? And I always tell people, hint, all fundraising is still personal. So here's the tale. Juliana Schmoot is a major Democratic fundraiser, had worked for Tom Daschle and others, and she got a call saying, hey, Juliana, can you go meet with this guy named Barack Obama in Chicago? Now, keep in mind, Barack Obama had just been an elected official in Illinois in the State House. He had just been elected to the U.S. Senate, and he woke up one day and said, I think I want to be president. So Juliana goes out and says the same thing I would do with anyone. Tell me who you know. And Michelle Obama said, we know Penny Pritzker. And of course, my friend kind of rolled her eyes and went, well, Penny will write a check, but she's never really stepped up. And Michelle said, no, you don't understand. Here's the story. Michelle Obama's brother is Craig Robinson. Craig Robinson is a basketball coach. A few years ago, he was the coach for either the Beavers or the Ducks out in Oregon. I don't know. It's the West Coast. It's an animal. You would think I would remember it. But one of those basketball teams. But in the early days, Craig Robinson coached Penny Pritzker's two sons in middle school basketball. So for years, the Pritzkers and the Obamas hung out at basketball games, getting to know one another. So when they asked Penny Pritzker, will you be the national finance chair? Penny Pritzker said yes. She raised $16 million from people in her Rolodex. But what some people forget, she was the first major Democratic woman that supported Barack Obama and not Hillary Clinton. And that was a major message. So remember, all fundraising is still personal. And you have to work on that. And yes, she ended up being Commerce Secretary, but that was just a pipe dream back in 2008. So be thinking who you know. Too many people tell me, Nancy, I'll ask anybody but my friends, neighbors, and family for money. And I went, so if your friends, neighbors, and family are not going to give you money, what makes you think strangers will give you money? And they just can't answer that. A lot of what I teach, and we don't have a lot of time to go into great detail, is storytelling. Jerry Panis, who he just passed away about 2 years ago, called himself the maniac in chief of new ideas at the Institute for Charitable Giving in Chicago. I had the pleasure of taking a 4-day advanced fundraising seminar from him. And the thing I walked away from was the most important is storytelling is the fiber of relationship building. Everyone has a story. And you need to be able to tell stories, but also listen to others by asking questions. In my class, we read not one, but 2 of the books that Jerry Panis has written, because still, when I look at fundraising books, there's nothing that is better than a Jerry Panis book. So, brain science and what it has to do with storytelling. So, of course, you know this means that we have to tell a story. I've worked with a lot of medical groups over the years that really think that fundraising is not an emotional decision, but it is. You know, it's not just the facts. It's the story and how you utilize the facts in your story. So, the Earl of Sandwich, card playing, and what it has to do with brain science. In 1748, the British aristocrat and politician, of course, the 4th Earl of Sandwich, spent a lot of his free time playing cards. He greatly enjoyed eating a snack while still keeping one hand free for the cards. So he came up with the idea to eat beef between 2 slices of toast which would finally allow him to eat and play cards at the same time. Or as I like to point out, the first time a man had to multitask. Bump, I open in the Catskills next week. So, eating his newly invented sandwich, the name for 2 slices of bread with meat in between, became one of the most popular meal inventions in the world. Now, what's interesting about this is that you are very likely to never forget the story of who invented the sandwich ever again, or at least less likely to do so than if I would have presented this in a bullet point in an Excel spreadsheet going, get 2 pieces of bread, some cheese and a piece of ham and get some mustard. But now, every time you will eat a sandwich, you're going to remember how the Earl of Sandwich invented it. We want you to be memorable, but we want you to remember others. And ever since caveman drawings, as human beings, we communicate using stories. People often ask me, well, Nancy, how do people, when you go to countries in the Middle East or in Africa or somewhere else around the world, how do you even communicate? And I specialize in teaching women how to succeed and how to enter public service, because we all have the same stories. We all talk about how we raise kids, different things that we do. But studies show that if you convey information using a story, people will remember 65 to 70%. If I conveyed information just by using facts and figures, people would only remember 5 to 10%. So think of the stories so you can tell people. Why? Stories make us more alive, more human, more courageous, and more loving. You can add your spin to the story. I had a candidate more than 20 years ago that actually homeschooled his kids in the time when homeschooling was not a thing. And we knew he would be attacked by doing that. And so I said, tell me why you're homeschooling your kids. And it was because in the public schools, his son who had dyslexia was going to be put in a special ed class. And he did not want his child pegged as that. So he thrived in homeschooling, and so did and it ended up that the rest of his children did. Because we told that story. It really inoculated us from being attacked for doing something that was not mainstream many decades ago. So you can tell a lot about yourself in a story. And you also learn a lot when you listen to other stories as you are preparing how you're going to ask that person for money. A good story can't be devised, it has to be distilled. Raymond Chandler wrote that, and he is, the hard-boiled detective author. It means that you or your candidate are going to get a lot more tired of what you're asking people, right? The stories you tell, than your audience. But the more you tell a story, the better it becomes. It becomes distilled. And it has to be authentic, right? In this world of the internet. Ted Cruz can't just say, I was just going down to Mexico. No, he had to come back, because everything is public. So you must be very careful. So you can't devise things. It has to be a real story. It has to be, again, going back to the truth. Presenting data doesn't mean good storytelling. Years ago, when I was just a kid, one of my jobs was to train candidates running for Congress in 1982 how to give a better speech. And I met with a candidate named Connie Mack. Now, this was Connie Mack, the dad. And here was Connie Mack, who was a bank president in Florida, who got up and was talking about how interest rates were 21%. And he was talking about ROIs and all this. And it was like he was giving a lecture at the Wharton School of Business instead of learning how to communicate with his voters. And I remember saying, Mr. Mack, why don't you talk about as a banker that when you meet with people that all they want is to buy a house with two or three bedrooms and have a playground in the backyard for their kids, but they can't do it because of the interest rates, and how that means that their kids can't thrive. instead of telling me the facts and figures. And I said, really, what people want to know about you is how your grandfather founded Major League Baseball. And he totally transformed the way he gave a speech. Now, he incorporated the data into the story, but he still was able to tell a great story. And I would run into him. He ended up being the U.S. Senator from Florida, and I would run into him years later, and he'd always go, you were just this little young thing basically telling me my speech sucked, but doing it in a very polite way. But it's very important that you know what your story is, and it's not just data. Steps to being a superhero. I mean, nobody tells a story like the late Stan Lee did. And he was interviewed on the 50th anniversary of his creation of Marvel Comics. And no matter where I go in the world, everybody knows Spider-Man. So after he was doing these interviews, this was his advice. How did he create a great story? A good guy, and you can see I've added or girl, trying to do something, facing insurmountable odds. Like, are we going to raise enough money? Can we actually win in this district? Who keeps getting in trouble in his or her quest, because running for office is not easy. So the reader keeps wondering, how's he or she going to get out of this one, until after a lot of suffering along the way, there's a victory of sorts. And so my friend wrote a story that said, as she assessed this, Stan Lee focused his career on superheroes, but this advice surely fits your own story. If you're trying to advance a cause, you know it's a heroic struggle. You're on a journey to a far-off destination that may never be reached in your lifetime. It may be an end to poverty, to prejudice, or disease, for example. There are a lot of obstacles along the way, and the quest is fraught with many challenges. But you have your small victories all the same. Are you telling you or your organization's story as a dramatic struggle against the odds and celebrating your victories? You should be. Take it from Marvel Comics. You've got a rip-roaring page-turner all around you. Tell the tale with the drama and high stakes it surely merits, because you want everybody pulling for you every step of the way. Katja Andreessen wrote that assessment, and I couldn't agree more. You want everyone rooting for you as you are telling people why you're running for office, how you're going to win, who's going to vote for you. As we say, there's a superhero inside of all of us. We just need the courage to put on the cape. I've never met anyone who really likes to ask for money, right? You give people an option. Cold call someone and ask for $2,800 in a federal race, the maximum you can give in a primary, or go to the dentist, have all of your teeth pulled, and throw in some root canals and have it all done without anesthesia, right? And most people just say, send me to the dentist. But every day you have to put the courage to put on that cape and go out and greet the voters and meet with donors. Harry Winston. Harry Winston was one of the world's greatest diamond dealers. He ranked up there with Tiffany's and Cartier and Fabergé. In fact, Marilyn Monroe sang a whole song about diamonds are a girl's best friend and quoted Harry Winston. So there's this great story about Harry Winston. The famous New York diamond dealer, Harry Winston, heard about a wealthy Dutch merchant who was looking for a certain kind of diamond to add to his collection. Winston called the merchant, told him he thought he had the perfect stone, and invited the collector to come to New York to examine it. The collector flew to New York, and Winston assigned his best salesman to meet him and show him the diamond. When the salesman presented the diamond to the merchant, he described it, the expensive stone, by pointing out all of its fine technical features, the cut, the clarity, the carat. The merchant listened and praised the stone, but turned away and said, it's a wonderful stone, but it's not exactly what I wanted. Winston, who had been watching the presentation from a distance, stopped the merchant and said, do you mind if I show you the diamond once again? The merchant agreed, and Winston presented the same stone. But instead of talking about the actual technical features of the stone, Winston spoke spontaneously and from the heart about his true admiration of the diamond and what a rare thing of beauty it was. Abruptly, the customer changed his mind and bought the diamond. When he was waiting for the diamond to be packaged and brought to him, the merchant turned to Winston and said, "Why did I buy it from you when I had no difficulty saying no to your salesman?" Winston replied, "The salesman is one of the best in the business, and he knows a lot more about diamonds than I do. I pay him a good salary for what he knows, but I would gladly pay him twice as much if I could put into him something I have and he lacks. You see, he knows diamonds, but I love them. It's all about your tone." My friend and colleague, Deb Sofield, who's an executive speech coach down in South Carolina, always says, you can tell when people are smiling on the phone. Your attitude, being glad to be there, it's a critical part of your fundraising strategy. So let's look at a fundraising leadership model. So as I mentioned earlier, as I get a quick drink, my first job in Washington, D.C. was with an unknown freshman congressman named Newt Gingrich. Now, Newt, is a lightning rod in the community. And as I like to say, we're not North Korea. None of us have to agree on everything. And Newt and I don't always agree on everything. But I always tell people this fundraising leadership model, or just this leadership model that he taught me when I was, decades ago, I live it every day and I teach it to others. It's listen, learn, help, lead. When you're meeting with somebody, when you're meeting with the donor, listen, ask questions, develop appreciative understanding. We're not going to know everything. When I mentor college students, 10, 15 years ago, I never even mentioned student debt. Now my first question is, how much student loans do you have to pay back? Because if I have a student that says, yes, I want to go to law school next year, and if they have $100,000 in student loan debt, perhaps I will say, maybe you need to work a couple of years. Maybe you should go to law school at night. I mean, there are alternatives. The same way when dealing with older people. They know a lot more about Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security than I'm ever going to know. But you need to develop appreciative understanding, because then you learn. You process what you've heard, remember it, and learn from it. If you go meet with a restaurant owner, now it's all about COVID, but the number one concern of restaurant owners is the increase in the minimum wage to $15 an hour. So if you're going to meet with a restaurant owner to ask for money, you don't want to talk about abortion. You want to listen and learn what he or she is going through to run a business. Because then, how are you going to be the helper? Be the catalyst in getting something done. I like to remind people vote for people who get stuff done. It goes back to that trust aspect. Are you a woman or man of your word? If I'm asking for money, I'll say, I agree with you on this issue. And because of you, we can work together to deal with X, Y, or Z. But I'm drawing the donor, potential donor, the voter, the volunteer into being part of the team. Because after you've listened, learned, and helped people, you will almost always be asked to lead them. Again, be that person that gets something done. Sometimes, especially with female candidates, I have to peel the onion back so I can really listen to them about what they have done in their community, so we can then develop that case of support for them. But I think if you lived your life this way, you would raise more money, get more votes, and have more volunteers. But it's hard because, there's a saying, and we're not going to get to it, but God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, except during this speed fundraising session, where you need to listen twice as much as you speak. Now, one of the things that we will learn is how to write a campaign plan. And we're not going to have time in our remaining. In fact, we're going to cut this off in just a moment. I'm going to go to the very end of this presentation. I want you to remember these few things. Your heart is closer to your wallet than your head. Most fundraising decisions come from the heart. Even if you're meeting with a, hard-boiled business owner, right? If you're meeting with George Soros or the late, some of our donors that just passed away, most of the reasons they give money is because they want to make the world a better place. So it is not about those facts and figures. I told you, why do we use storytelling in our fundraising? Because you want to be memorable, you want people to remember you, and you want to remember others. Finally, say thank you. It's the number one reason donors stop giving. It is so critical to your strategy. And it means, yes, you still have to write handwritten thank you notes. I worked on Bob Dole's campaign back in 1987 when he was running against Vice President Bush. And I can't tell you the number of people that I called and said, would you consider supporting Dole? And they all said, well, Vice President Bush wrote me a handwritten thank you note. Studies show people don't throw thank you notes away. In fact, when I was moving to Texas, I found bags of thousands of thank you notes. I thought it was just me being a hoarder, or as I like to call myself, a historian. But you know what? I kept finding thank you notes that I would do screenshots and send it to the people who have now really risen in their careers. But they took the time to write me a thank you note. Finally, here's my contact information. I'm happy to answer questions, tell you more. I think GSPM is a great program. I wish I would have. It wasn't really around when I was first coming to Washington. But I think it's a wonderful program, and I'm happy to answer questions. And I leave you with this last thought. This is my dad and me in front of the White House. I was 3 years old. Yes, this is White House without a fence. And they took me to D.C. When I was a kid, my dad, who had a 9th grade education but ended up running a major company in Dayton, Ohio, he really did believe in the American dream, and he actually wore, yes, a tie to the White House as a tourist, and I had on my best Easter dress. So you can really affect change in America around the world by getting involved and learning how to communicate with passion and to persuade people to, what you want to do. You want to help people achieve success. And with that, I will turn this back to Ms. Kyra.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Professor Bocskor, for that wonderful presentation. So we're going to prepare to go into Q&A. So to our audience members, I'm sure you have many, many questions for Professor Bocskor to go through for Q&A. So please feel free to kind of brainstorm them and send them over to me using the Q&A box. Once again, it's just by activating the bottom menu screen there, you can see the Q&A window, and you can type in your questions. I see some of you have already reached out, so that's really wonderful, and we look forward to taking them up very, very soon. So before we do that, let's talk about how you can be part of the GSPM Master in Political Management program at the George Washington University, where Professor Bocskor is one of the wonderful faculty members teaching courses here. So in order to apply, there are a few items that you would compile with the help of your dedicated enrollment advisors. And the first item is the online application form. And so we'll go into detail once you're ready to apply. There's the application fee and, of course, the statement of purpose, which serves as your voice to the admissions committee. So they get to know more about who you are as an individual, basically incorporating your story that Professor Bocskor mentioned. Storytelling is so important, so that's an opportunity for you to incorporate that into the application, and of course your resume and 2 letters of recommendations, transcript from your undergrad, as well as the GRE. However, it is waived for those who have a GPA of 3.0 or higher, and if your GPA is slightly shy of 3.0, that is something that our enrollment advisors would be happy to work with you to provide guidance on how you can, address that in your application. And the upcoming start date, so summer is coming up. We're in February, but we are Looking forward to May. May 3rd is summer 1 entry point, and June 28th is summer 2. So we're currently accepting applications for both start dates. And yeah, we will provide for you the contact information for advisors as well. So now let's go into Q&A. So Bocskor, I hope you're ready.
I am.
First question. Wonderful. Okay, so the first question that we have is from a member of our audience. I just have to open up the screen a little bit here. Okay.
I actually see it from Anna Ramos.
Perfect. Okay.
Hello, Anna. Nice to visit with you. Her question, just for everyone, is she's trying to raise money to support a political organization here in the U.S. that promotes democracy in Nicaragua. How can we make this project viable among U.S. university students? This is for them to donate funds for this project. First, I always want to refer people, because one of the lectures we have, we take a field trip to the old Foundation Center, which is now called Candid, CANDID.org. And Candid, which is a merger of GuideStar and the Foundation Center, it's the world's largest resource for nonprofits. It has a huge database. I can type into the database, I want to fund, three-legged cats in Ukraine, and things will come up. So go to Candid and just get some strategy there. This will be helpful. Then I would Google what communities have the largest number of Nicaraguan expats. I've had to do this for several groups. Whether it is in Washington, D.C., it's some of the largest number of people from Mongolia. So find out where people go to. That's going to help you target your market. Now you do have a challenge, because college students don't have a lot of money to give. And when they do give it, it has to be something that is, people give money and get motivated to do things out of two things: fear and anger, right? So they're angry about something and they'll give money, or they're scared of something. So I think you need to then develop, I don't know what your message is on why is this important? I mean, I know why it's important, but you have to explain to them why it's urgent, right? Why do they need to help? And it may be that perhaps taking a look at some of these university students, is this university in a community where you can have a Nicaraguan expat that owns a restaurant or a business that may want to host something once we can see people in person again, right? And so college students will do anything for free food. So there's that little bit of a quid pro quo on come to our event. But I think that you need somebody with a compelling story, another college student, to share on what life is like in Nicaragua and how we really need American students to step up to help. I can dig up some old things that I've written for other organizations that wanted to do something similar. You can always email me and I'll see if I can do that. But I think that's my first start for you.
Wonderful. Thank you. So our next question is, how has fundraising changed over the last 10 years or so in your career? And what advice would you give to our audience on how to incorporate this into their strategy?
Right. I think ever since, the McCain-Feingold bill for campaign finance reform, it's just been a disaster, right? It's called unintended consequences, passed nearly, 20 years ago, where it really limited what political parties could do. Prior to that, corporations, labor unions, and people could give unlimited amounts to the Democratic and the Republican Party to use for party building activities. So, for instance, it couldn't be used for direct support of candidates, but it could be used for political education, registering voters, those kinds of things. After that passed, all money that went to the parties had to be regulated in certain amounts. So because people are smart, especially attorneys who specialize in campaign finance, this is how we've had the growth of super PACs, right? Unregulated, these independent expenditures. So right now, the parties are frankly neutered when helping candidates because they can only accept so much money. Unlike these, they're called dark money groups, and I have to agree, I'm not a supporter of these at all. That meant that there are all these people that could raise unlimited amounts of money with very little oversight, very little transparency, that are influencing elections. And I think it's a travesty to my key point of transparency. So I think this is important. That's been the biggest change because these super PACs can spend and raise so much money that a political campaign doesn't even have that kind of resources, because if you're running for U.S. Senate or U.S. Congress, the most you can take is $2,800 in the primary and $2,800 in the general. $5,600, and you're trying to raise millions. It makes it much more difficult. So I actually see that as a bad thing that's happened in fundraising that I have lived through the last more than a decade.
Thank you. And we have time for maybe one or two more questions. So the next one is it, and it's perfect timing because you mentioned transparency. Is it significant to share with donors how the money that was raised was actually used?
I think, especially in nonprofit world, right? United Way is they've just been in trouble for years, ever since they were spending so much on overhead. So I think that because of GuideStar and other groups where you take a look at how was the money spent, and is it going to, a lot of organizations, most of the money they raise goes to pay for all the fundraising. So you need to be able to show that you have, that you're funding programs, and people look at those ratings before they make donations. I think in political campaigns, again, it's why I monetize everything. If I go in to meet with a donor and I'm asking for $1,000 to buy 5 radio spots, I'll actually play the radio spot. Here's a sample of the spot. Will you help me invest in that? So you don't want your opponents to know how what you're doing and don't have your strategy. But I think you need to have some talking points on how you are spending your money, because we really are seeing, after all of these bad experiences with super PACs, that people want their money back. I think there was some businessman that gave $2 million to help the president, to help Trump, expose the fraud in the election. He wants his money back now. And we're seeing a lot of people, because of this dark money, that the money are going into consultant pockets and not being used the way that it should be. So, yes, I like to tell people this is what we're doing.
Thank you. And finally, would you go into detail, or a little bit of detail, in the course that you teach within GSPM and the kind of students that enroll in your course? Just, kind of give our audience a sample of the demographics of students.
I have people across the map. I have recent college graduates who have volunteered on some campaigns or just interested in politics. I have people from the nonprofit community, from associations, who take the class because they want to learn how to ask for money. I have older students that are working on a master's, and they may be in their 50s or 60s, because they can be like me. We all love knowledge. I also have students that, around the world. And during our first class, I do what I call my version of Sorority Rush, name, hometown, and major. And then I try to, for each of my class members, each of my students, I then figure out something we have in common. So it may be a student that said, I went to Duke University, and I'll point out, my mother thinks Coach K, the basketball coach, is a god, and she knows every Duke player by name. And right now, Mom's 95, and we watch Duke basketball. I had Coach K autograph a book and send it to her a few years ago, and Mom thought she had died and gone to heaven. So I'm always looking. And so there are students said, well, Nancy, I'm from Mongolia, and I know you have nothing in common there. I said, no, I've already been to Mongolia twice. So just stunned him. So it's one of the things when I talk about it's finding that 1 degree of separation, I work very hard to always find something that we have in common. And so I do that with every class, every student in class. And we have people now that are, one of my former students is the finance director at the Democratic National Committee. We have key Republicans. We have people in associations running PACs who started out as students in my class. One of them started a nonprofit in Virginia that has now taken that down to Texas. And that whole idea came from exploring that in her course. So I really want to help the nonprofit community as well.
That's amazing. And it looks like we wrapped up just on time. So thank you so much, Professor Nancy Bocskor, for today's presentation. It's just so many gems, lessons, and anecdotal stories that you shared with us. I wish we had more time, and I'm sure our audience would agree. And to our audience, thank you so much for reserving the time to speak with us, to listen in on this presentation today. And we hope that you can join us for the upcoming starts. We welcome you to GSPM community. And hopefully you get to begin your studies with us this year. Once again, thank you everyone for your time, and I wish you a wonderful day.